The nation was shaken when Vice President J.D. Vance led a tearful prayer for his close friend, Charlie Kirk, who was killed during a campus event in Utah. With millions watching, his words touched hearts as he remembered Kirk's fight for freedom and conservative values. The tribute became one of the most emotional moments in recent U.S. history, uniting Americans in grief. Earlier that evening, Utah Valley University buzzed with excitement as Kirk, a conservative activist admired by many young Americans, calmly answered tough questions on stage. Then in an instant, everything changed. A sharp crack echoed. Students screamed and chaos swept the hall. Kirk collapsed, clutching his chest as the crowd scattered in panic. The shooter slipped away, leaving heartbreak and confusion behind. Within minutes, phones lit up with alerts. Charlie Kirk shot at Utah Valley University. Across the country, homes fell silent in shock. Social media filled with sorrow and outrage. In Washington, Vice President Vance froze as he read the news. His hands shook. His closest friend, a man like a brother to him, was gone in a senseless act of violence. As sirens wailed in Utah and federal agents swarmed the campus, America braced for the painful prayer that would soon follow. Helicopters circled above as searchlights swept across rooftops. In the parking lot, students cried, some clinging to each other, others frantically calling their parents. The voice that had once inspired and challenged so many was now silent. From the Oval Office, President Donald Trump spoke with anger and sorrow, calling the attack not just a crime against Charlie Kirk, but an attack on America itself. He promised swift and unforgiving justice, but across the nation, people waited to hear from J.D. Vance. Everyone knew how close he and Charlie had been. Alone in his office, head bowed, Vance thought not about cameras or headlines, but about the last hug they shared. The last time Charlie had said, "I'm praying for you, brother." Now it was his turn to pray. When he finally entered the White House press room, silence filled the air. Reporters who were usually restless and sharp sat still, their faces somber. Vance gripped the podium, gathering himself. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then, with a trembling voice, he said, "The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk is pure evil, a cowardly strike at America's soul." His voice cracked, but he pressed on, calling Charlie a man of faith welcomed home by the Lord. Some in the room wept, others bowed their heads. Millions across the country watched as Vance spoke through tears, and in that moment, it felt like the whole nation had joined in a single prayer. Phones buzzed endlessly, and every television station carried the broadcast as anchors struggled to put words to the tragedy. In Utah, students who had been inside the hall gave tearful interviews, their voices shaking as they recalled the chaos. "He was just talking about faith and freedom," one young woman whispered, mascara streaked from crying. Then the shot. I still hear it in my head. Across the country, people felt paralyzed. Churches opened for prayer, families sat in silence at dinner tables, and strangers who had never met Charlie Kirk wept as if they had lost one of their own. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance prepared to speak again. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from supporters, politicians, and everyday Americans, but he ignored them. Instead, he stared at a photo of himself and Charlie laughing backstage at a Turning Point USA event. The weight of what lay ahead pressed on him. How could he lift a grieving nation when his own heart felt broken? His mind drifted back to 2017, when Charlie first encouraged him after an appearance on Tucker Carlson's show. A short message of kindness sparked a friendship that grew into brotherhood. Charlie wasn't just a friend, he was a mentor and a guide. When Vance hesitated about running for Senate in 2021, Charlie was the first to urge him on, believing in him long before the polls did. Now that voice was gone. Quietly, J.D. whispered to himself, "How do I do this without you, brother?" His staff looked on, unsure what to say. They had never seen the vice president so vulnerable. On social media, Americans shared their own memories. Photos from Turning Point USA events filled timelines, while young people recalled how Charlie gave them courage to defend their beliefs in classrooms. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the unity. For the first time in years, the nation was not divided. It was brought together in tears. The phone rang and J.D. answered softly. On the line was President Donald Trump, his voice slower and heavy with grief. "J.D., I know he was a very close friend of yours," the president said. J.D. closed his eyes, holding back tears. "Yes, sir. He was like a brother to me. Trump paused before continuing. Charlie loved his family. He was so proud of Erica and the kids. I saw it every time we spoke. This loss is beyond words, but we cannot let it be in vain. You and I must carry his fight forward. JD gripped the phone tightly as the words echoed in his chest. Minutes later, the White House announced that JD would lead the nation in prayer. By evening, millions were already tuned in, waiting, grieving, hoping for words that could hold the country together. Alone in preparation, JD whispered, "Charlie, I need your strength tonight." Across America, every screen turned to Washington. From diners to dorm rooms, from airports to living rooms, people stopped and watched. Social media filled with Charlie Kirk's photo, Bible verses and messages of sorrow. Thousands posted the same plea. Pray for Erica, pray for the kids. JD knew the weight of what he was about to do. His words would be for more than himself or Charlie's family. They would be for a wounded nation. His wife entered quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You can do this," she whispered. "You're speaking for all of us." He nodded, though his eyes revealed the storm inside. Under his breath, he prayed, "Lord, give me strength." JD whispered for strength, and in that quiet moment, it felt as if the whole nation held its breath with him. Surrounded by Secret Service, he stepped out of his office. The White House halls, usually filled with motion and chatter, were hushed. Aides stood along the walls, their eyes red, some whispering prayers. Each step JD took felt heavier than the last. Beyond the doors, he could hear reporters waiting, cameras humming, ready to capture the moment. He carried no notes. Every word would come from the heart. At the doorway, he paused, steadying himself as memories of Charlie flashed through his mind, laughing backstage, speaking to crowds, hugging his children. The weight nearly broke him, but he pressed forward. When the doors opened, silence filled the room. Reporters lowered their heads, sensing the gravity. Millions of Americans were watching, and the quiet was so deep it felt as if the world itself had stopped. JD approached the podium, gripped it tightly, and drew a long breath. For a moment, no words came. Then, raw and heavy with emotion, his voice broke the silence. "The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk is nothing short of evil, a cowardly attack on America's soul." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. Faith, family, freedom, the right to speak truth trampled by violence. My blood boils. Justice must be relentless and unforgiving. He stopped, chest heaving, fighting tears. Then he said, "Charlie Kirk was a Christian who accepted Jesus as his savior. Tonight, I know the Lord is welcoming him with the words, 'Well done, good and faithful servant.'" Across the nation, people wept. Families bowed their heads in living rooms. Pastors replayed his words for prayer circles, and congregations joined in silence. JD's grief had become the nation's grief. JD's words carried not just sorrow, but a fierce promise. Charlie Kirk's fight for truth and freedom would not end here. As his voice echoed across America, households fell silent. People clung to every syllable, some bowing their heads, others wiping away tears they didn't expect. In small-town churches, pastors replayed his prayer over loudspeakers. In college dorms, even students who once debated Charlie whispered that they had never imagined his voice would be silenced like this. For one night, political lines blurred. Americans of all backgrounds felt the same wound, the loss of a husband, a father, and a man who lived with conviction. On Twitter, the Pray for Charlie surged to the top worldwide. Strangers shared their grief as if they had lost a brother. "I never met him," one woman posted, "but tonight feels like I lost family." Inside the White House, aides watched from the hall, tissues in hand. They whispered that JD was speaking not as a vice president, but as a broken friend. His raw emotion pulled the nation into his grief, binding millions through shared tears. Steadying himself, JD leaned closer to the microphone. His voice cracked as he said, "Charlie's children will grow up with stories instead of memories, photographs instead of laughter, and silence where their father's voice should have been." Gasps filled the room. Reporters lowered their cameras, unable to hide their tears. He pressed on. Charlie Kirk's life is a reminder: faith, family, country, love. He was a servant of God who poured himself into the fight for justice and freedom. My heart aches for Erica and their two beautiful children, but I promise his legacy will live on. JD paused, then lifted his eyes, shining with tears. Charlie was an American hero, and tonight, the heavens gained a soldier of Christ. His words pierced through screens and radios across the nation. Families held hands, Churches erupted in prayer, and even strangers on busy streets stopped in silence. JD wasn't just honoring his friend, he was making sure America remembered him too. JD's voice softened as he recalled 2017. After I appeared on Tucker Carlson's show, I got a message from someone I barely knew. He told me I did a great job. That was Charlie Kirk. The room leaned in, reporters scribbling as he continued. That simple act of kindness started a friendship that lasted until today. Charlie was fascinated by ideas. He was humble enough to change his mind and generous enough to welcome others when they changed theirs. With Charlie, it was never "I told you so." It was always welcome. A faint smile broke through JD's tears as he remembered those early years. When I thought about running for Senate, Charlie was the first person I called. He introduced me to people, gave honest feedback, and supported me when I was polling under 5%. He didn't have to do it. He did it because he was my friend and because he was a good man. For millions watching, it was no longer about politics. It was about loyalty, friendship, and love that doesn't fade. JD's voice grew heavier. Charlie wasn't just a political leader. He was a brother in the fight. When I doubted myself, he lifted me. When the weight of politics strained my family, he reminded me that faith would carry us through. His voice shook as he went on. When I became the vice presidential nominee, Charlie was there. He prayed with me, hugged me, and said, "Jay, focus on the mission. God gave you this path for a reason." The cameras caught every tear sliding down his face, and the nation felt his heartbreak in real time. Outside the White House, crowds gathered with candles. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, holding hands, praying and singing hymns. Some carried posters of Charlie's face. Others waved American flags in silent tribute. Across the country, in churches, parks, and small towns, people mourned together. For the first time in years, unity wasn't about politics. It was about grief and the love for a man who had touched countless lives. JD's voice softened as he turned to Charlie's family. Charlie was proudest when he spoke of Erica and their 2 children. He often told me, "Politics can wait. My family comes first." He loved being a husband. He loved being a father. That was his greatest joy. His voice cracked as he imagined Erica's pain. My heart aches for her, and for the children who will grow up with stories instead of their father's laughter. That empty chair at the dinner table, that silence in the house, it will echo forever. But America must help fill that silence with love and prayer. In homes across the nation, families hugged tighter. Parents held their children with tears in their eyes. Outside the White House, the crowd swelled. Some chanted Charlie's name softly. Others knelt in prayer. JD's words had moved beyond politics. They were about life's fragility, the sanctity of family, and the hole left when love is stolen by violence. Lifting his head, his voice grew stronger, as if Charlie himself was giving him courage. Charlie Kirk was more than a leader. He was a man of faith. He gave his life in service, not for recognition, but because he believed God had called him to something greater. He challenged his generation with conviction and courage. He believed in truth, in the strength of family, and in our responsibility to defend freedom. He didn't just speak these values, he lived them. Across the country, people nodded through tears. They weren't just mourning a man, they were remembering what he stood for. JD's words cut deeper. Charlie's life is a reminder, our days are not promised. But if we live with love, courage, and faith in God, then even in death our legacy speaks louder than hate. The room remained hushed, but the nation wept. For many, this was more than a prayer. It was a call to live with the same fire Charlie carried every day. JD's voice trembled as he remembered one of his hardest seasons. When I was running for Senate, I'll be honest, I almost gave up. The pressure, the attacks, the polls saying I didn't stand a chance, it weighed on me. But Charlie never let me quit. He lifted me. JD's eyes glistened as he remembered. Charlie called me night after night. He prayed with me when I was too tired to pray. He walked me into rooms full of donors when no one even knew my name. And he never asked for anything in return, only that I stayed true to the mission. I wouldn't be standing here as your vice president if not for Charlie Kirk. He believed in me before the world did. And tonight, I stand here believing in him. Across the country, people whispered, "This is what real friendship looks like." JD's voice softened as he spoke of his own children. When I became vice president, my kids struggled. The cameras, the security, the constant attention. It was overwhelming. I carried guilt for dragging them into a life they never asked for. But Charlie was always there. He'd text me, "Jay, you're doing the right thing. Stay strong for them. I'll pray for your family every day." And he did. He checked in on my wife. He made sure my children felt loved, even in the shadow of politics. His voice broke. He was the kind of friend who never forgot what mattered most: family. For millions watching, this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about the quiet, unseen ways true friends carry each other through life. JD's tone grew firmer. Charlie was a man of faith. We'd debate theology, Catholicism versus Protestantism, but we always ended in laughter, because we knew what united us was far greater than what divided us. Charlie didn't just talk about Jesus. He lived like a man who loved him. His kindness, courage, and honesty flowed from his faith. That's why people followed him, because they saw something real. His voice grew heavy as he went on. Someone said Charlie died doing what he loved, speaking truth, answering questions, even when the crowd wasn't friendly. That was Charlie. Brave enough to stand, humble enough to listen, faithful enough to endure. As his words carried across the airwaves, pastors repeated them from pulpits, families knelt together in prayer, and young people wiped away tears. JD wasn't just giving a eulogy, he was reminding America of the power of faith lived boldly. He steadied himself with another memory. During the 2024 campaign, we had a rally in Wisconsin. It was late, the crowd was thin, and honestly, I thought it was one of my worst speeches. I walked off stage. JD took a shaky breath as he remembered. After one of my worst campaign rallies in Wisconsin, I walked off stage feeling defeated. Charlie was waiting backstage. He put his arm around me and said, "Brother, don't you see? You don't need 1,000 cheers to change the world. You just need one heart to believe. And tonight you reached more than one." His lips trembled. That was Charlie, always lifting others, always reminding us of the bigger picture. I left that rally with hope, not because of applause, but because of his encouragement. Across America, parents whispered Charlie's words to their children, "One heart is enough." Families wept. Realizing how deeply those words still spoke even after his death, JD's tone softened. Charlie wasn't just a leader. He was a listener. In politics, people talk over each other all the time, but Charlie listened with his whole heart. I remember one night, overwhelmed by attacks and exhaustion, I called him. He didn't give me a speech. He just let me pour it all out. Then he said, "I hear you, JD, and I'm with you." Sometimes that's all you need, to know someone is with you. Tonight I wish I could call him one more time, but I know he's listening from above. The nation wept with him. Families, pastors, students, everyone watching felt as though they too had lost a friend who had once listened to their struggles. JD gripped the podium tighter, his grief hardening into resolve. Charlie was more than a friend. He was my brother, and brothers never walk alone. Tonight, even though he's gone, I still feel him standing with me. The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk was an act of pure evil, but evil will not win. His legacy of faith, family, and freedom will live on in us all. Tears streamed down his face as he raised his voice. Charlie's fight is now our fight. His mission is now our mission. And we will not rest until his vision for America shines brighter than ever before. Outside the White House, the crowd erupted, chanting, "We'll carry the torch." Candles flickered in the night as strangers embraced, united by grief but also by hope. Millions at home wept openly. This was no longer just JD Vance's prayer. It was the cry of a wounded nation, promising to honor Charlie's legacy together. JD paused, remembering his earlier conversation with President Trump. When I walked into the Oval Office, the president didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, nodded, and said quietly, "I know he was a good friend of yours. He really loved his family." JD's voice broke as he nodded. The president was right. Charlie loved Erica and their two little children more than anything. For all his public work, his heart was always at home. And that's what makes this so painful. The world lost a leader, but a family lost their anchor. The briefing room was heavy with silence. Reporters who were usually quick to challenge lowered their pens. Some wiped away tears. Across the country, Americans replayed the moment, hearing not a politician but a friend's raw grief. The image of the vice president crying openly shook the nation. It was unfiltered humanity in a time of tragedy. JD wiped his eyes and leaned closer to the microphone. I was in a West Wing meeting when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It was our group chat, the one Charlie was in with friends, colleagues, brothers in the fight for America. Everyone was writing, "We're praying for you, Charlie." That's how I learned the news. Not from a headline, not from Secret Service, but from the people who loved him most, begging God for a miracle. His voice cracked. I prayed too, first for healing, then for peace. But God had other plans. Tonight, I can only trust that Charlie is with him now, talking to the big man directly. Outside the White House, thousands raised their phones, lights glowing against the night sky, symbolizing the group chat that would never be the same. Millions at home whispered the same words, "We're praying for you, Charlie." JD's eyes filled as he went on. What haunts me most is the empty seat. At dinners, at conferences, at meetings, Charlie was always there. He had this way of making every room brighter. And now that seat will always be empty. His children will grow up with stories instead of laughter. Erica will see photographs where his presence should have been. And all of America will feel that silence, the kind that never truly fades. No words could fill the silence that followed. Cameras captured the vice president, stepping back from the podium to collect himself. The room was so still it seemed to hold its breath. Across America, in living rooms, churches, and city streets, people mirrored that silence. Families embraced, strangers wept. The nation mourned a man whose absence was already louder than his voice had ever been. JD's voice shook as he recalled a memory etched in his heart. After every Turning Point USA event, after the cameras were off and the last handshake made, Charlie would always give me a hug. Not a polite pat, but a strong brotherly hug. He'd whisper, "I'm praying for you, JD, keep fighting." Tears streamed down as JD closed his eyes. That hug became my strength. In my darkest hours, when I doubted myself, I remembered that embrace. It reminded me I wasn't alone. The press room fell even stiller. Families watching at home thought of their own friends who had carried them through hard times. Many whispered, "I miss that hug." For JD, the embrace lived only in memory. For America, it became a symbol, a reminder of loyalty, faith, and brotherhood that no bullet could erase. He steadied himself. Charlie had a gift. He could walk into a room filled with tension, even anger, and calm it with his voice. I saw protesters scream at him, and instead of lashing back, he'd say, "Let's talk. Let's understand each other." That's what America lost. Not just a conservative leader, but a man who believed dialogue mattered. He didn't just fight, he listened. He built bridges even when others wanted to burn them. Outside, candlelight vigils spread across campuses and city squares. Students carried handmade signs. Charlie listened. The phrase echoed online, uniting people who had never met him but felt his presence through his work. Millions cried as they realized that a rare gift, a calm voice in a divided nation, was now gone. JD paused before sharing one of the most moving moments of his tribute. This morning in the Oval Office, President Trump said to me, "Charlie helped us win not just elections, but the hearts of young Americans." JD lowered his head. The president was right. Charlie wasn't chasing titles or power. He was chasing truth. And because of that, he changed the direction of this country. His tone grew heavier. And now that seat he once filled in so many rooms will remain empty. But America must decide. Will we leave that seat empty, or will we fill it by carrying on his mission? JD asked, his voice echoing through the silence. This was no longer just grief, it was a challenge. Charlie's life had been a torch, and now that torch needed hands willing to carry it forward. Across the nation, millions whispered the same vow. We'll carry it. At the podium, JD fell quiet. Cameras zoomed in as he closed his eyes, his lips trembling. For nearly a full minute, the entire nation watched in silence as the vice president bowed his head in prayer. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Families at home set aside their distractions, phones, forks, conversations, and joined in the stillness. For one moment, America was united. Then JD whispered, "Father in heaven, receive your servant Charlie. Give strength to Erica, protect their children, and give this nation the courage to honor him, not just with words, but with action." Across living rooms, city streets, and candlelit vigils, people wept and whispered Amen, as if they were praying in the same room. Hearts broke, but faith stirred. Many who had grown distant or doubtful found themselves whispering prayers again for the first time in years. JD straightened, his voice steady now. Charlie lit a torch, he declared, gripping the podium. And though the enemy thought they could snuff it out with one bullet, they were wrong. Because today, millions of us carry that torch. The crowd outside erupted, not with cheers, but with tears and solemn nods. Online, people typed the same vow: we'll carry it. In dorm rooms, students who once felt hopeless felt fire in their hearts. At kitchen tables, families held hands tighter. JD's voice rang with conviction. Charlie Kirk was not silenced. He speaks louder now through every person who takes up his fight. For truth, for freedom, for faith, for America. Across the country, vigils turned into commitments. Candles lifted high, people whispered, "I'll be the torchbearer." It was no longer just JD mourning a friend. It was America taking responsibility to ensure Charlie's legacy lived on. JD's final words broke even the hardest hearts. "Charlie, my brother, you ran a good race. You finished strong. Rest now, we've got it from here." He stepped back, wiping his face as cameras panned to the crowd. Men, women, and children wept openly. Across the nation, millions cried together, but grief slowly turned into resolve. Families whispered promises to love more deeply, to fight for truth more boldly, and to live with the same courage Charlie had shown. That night, candles flickered in every state. Online feeds filled not with anger, but with prayer, love, and unity. America mourned, but America also rose. JD Vance's prayer had become history, one of the most emotional and unifying moments this country had seen in decades. If this story touched you, let your heart speak. Hit the like button to honor Charlie's memory. Leave a comment below and share how his life inspired you. And don't just watch, subscribe to join this growing family of truth and hope. Together we carry Charlie's torch. America weeps, but America will rise.